The Celtic Church in Ireland during this period is not under the direct rule of Rome, and thus was to retain many of the early pre-Christian influences. Many ring forts still survive from this period and are associated with habitation for both animals and humans. Fine examples can be seen near Ballydavid and Ballyhay. By the end of the 9th century, development was to be interrupted by the arrival of the fearsome Vikings, who plundered many of the monasteries, but also set up important trade routes and built towers at Dublin, Wexford, Waterford, Cork and Limerick. No Viking remains survive on the peninsula, but they named the bay near Ballydavid Smerwick, which translates as the Bay of Butter. In the 12th century, the organisation of the church was to change to the Deason system under the rule of bishops, who organised what are now known as the parish churches. The monastic centres were deserted, later being used as burial grounds for unbaptised children. The 12th century also marked the arrival of the Normans in Ireland, and by the 13th century they were to have a profound effect on Ireland. They built most of the Irish towns and structured Irish society on a closer model to the European system. Within a short period of time, they integrated very much into Irish society. Many of their tower houses and baileys and town wells dot the landscape. There are the remains of 5 tower houses on the peninsula, the most impressive ones being at Maynard, Glarus and Rathernine. The town of Dingle was founded by the Fitzgerald and Rice families, who were to develop the town into the second largest port on the west coast. Extensive trade with France and Spain was the main reason for Dingle's importance, and also the town was an embarkation point for pilgrims on their way to Santiago to visit the shrine of St. James. It is said that the medieval church in Dingle, dedicated to St. James, was built by the Spanish. Dingle town was granted a charter in 1607 by King James, after his predecessor Queen Elizabeth had sanctioned it in 1585. The town was enclosed by a strong wall, with 2 gates in what is now Dyke Gate Lane. The area enclosed was what is now Main Street and parts of John and Goat Streets. The 16th and 17th centuries in Irish history are marked by rebellion and counter-rebellion. In Munster, the Fitzgerald rebellion were unceremoniously crushed. One of the most tragic events took place at Dunanore, near Ballyferriter, where the besieged Irish, Spanish and Italians were surrounded by Lord Grey, who was accompanied by Walter Raleigh and the poet Edmund Spenser, author of The Faerie Queene. On agreeing terms for surrender, the Italian leader was allowed to walk free. However, all the other 600 were slaughtered in the fort. Although Oliver Cromwell himself never came to Dingle Peninsula, his army under Sadler and Leigh Hunt finally ended any Irish resistance in 1649. The final stand was made at Maynard Castle, where 4 gunpowder charges were placed at the castle walls after the occupants had run out of ammunition. The castle was structurally damaged in the blast and all of the occupants killed. From the mid-17th century until the 1920s, the Dingle Peninsula was controlled by Lord Ventry. He had his family residence at Ballygoylan, later renamed as Burnham Estate. The house is now an Irish-speaking boarding school for girls. There is a collection of Ogham stones on the grounds of the estate, along with some exotic and unusual trees and plants, including a plantation of bamboo. The period of landlordism was generally a turbulent time on the Dingle Peninsula. One of the most tragic events to occur during this time was the famine of 1845 to 48. During this period, the potato crop failed, which was the staple diet of the majority of the population. Poor housing and disease, along with hunger, led to the deaths of 1,005,000 people, and at least the same number again left Ireland, heading mostly for North America. In the 1830s, the population of Ireland was just under 8 million. By the 1850s, it was down to 4 million. In the Dingle poorhouse alone, up to 5,000 people died and were buried in the paupers' burial ground, which overlooks Dingle town. No part of the peninsula escaped the ravages of the famine, and despite the coastal nature of the area, fishing was not developed enough to exploit the fish in the deeper waters off the coast. After the trauma of the famine, Nationalist Island was exhausted. Not until the 1870s does the tradition of populist nationalism reassert itself. A campaign to re-establish an Irish Parliament which would control domestic affairs was started in 1870 under the leadership of Protestant barrister named Isaac Butt. Its objective was to achieve Home Rule for Ireland within the United Kingdom. Butt was later replaced by Charles Stewart Parnell, who is often regarded as the uncrowned King of Ireland. Parnell was a formidable leader who transformed the Home Rulers into the Irish Parliamentary Party. He also became involved with the Irish National Land League and formed a close working relationship with Michael Davitt, the founder of the Land League. Between them, they were to put the issue of Home Rule firmly on the British agenda. Unfortunately, Parnell was to fall foul of the Irish hierarchy due to the fact that he was living with a married woman, Kitty O'Shea. His fall was of tragic proportions, and it poisoned the life of Nationalist Ireland for a generation. He was only 45 years old when he died. Just as politics and the land question had quickened in the 1880s, so did the other elements which contributed to the birth of the modern Irish state some 40 years later. Possibly the most defining moment in the formation of the Irish state was the 1916 Eastern Rebellion. With 7 members of the Irish Republican Brotherhood in command, the Fenians planned an armed uprising while Britain was at war. Although a failed insurrection, it further weakened the legitimacy of British rule in Nationalist Ireland, especially as all of the leaders, except for de Valera, were executed. A war of independence followed, which was finally resolved in the treaty, which was given the Republic of Ireland 26 of its 32 countries. The remaining 6 countries remained under the control of England, and almost inevitably a civil war ensued, in which many potential leaders were killed.